There is a plant that produces 5 different foods from a single organism: root, leaf, flower, pod, seed. 5 complete harvests from one investment. More protein than soy, more calcium than milk. It manufactures its own fertilizer while it feeds you. In 1975, the United States National Academy of Sciences published a report that should have changed human history. They called this plant a supermarket on a single stalk. They said it could solve protein deficiency across the developing world. They documented every claim. They verified every number. They made promises that seemed impossible to break. 50 years later, you have never heard its name. That silence has a price tag. Measured in malnutrition statistics across 3 continents. Measured in corporate fertilizer profits that depend on your ignorance. Measured in farmers trapped in cycles of dependency they never needed to enter. This is the winged bean, Sophocarpus tetragonalobus, the complete crop they buried because it threatened to make you independent. Welcome to Clean Eating Forgotten. The archive opens in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, 7,000 years ago. Picture a village surrounded by dense tropical forest. Morning mist clings to volcanic mountains that rise like sleeping giants above the tree line. The air is thick with moisture. Every surface glistens. Birds you have never heard call from canopies so dense that sunlight filters through in scattered golden beams. A woman tends a garden that looks nothing like the orderly rows you know. This is not agriculture as the industrial world understands it. Plants grow in layers. Vines climb over stalks. Roots tangle beneath the surface in what appears to be chaos, but is actually a system refined over millennia. She reaches for a climbing vine with distinctive 4-winged pods. The shape is unmistakable. 4 longitudinal ridges run the length of each pod, giving them a squared, almost architectural appearance. No other bean on Earth looks like this. Her grandmother planted this variety. Her great-grandmother planted it before that. The same genetic lineage, passed down through 50 generations without a single purchase, without a single merchant, without a single transaction of any kind. She picks the young pods for the morning meal. They snap cleanly from the vine. Tender, crisp. The texture sits somewhere between green bean and asparagus. There is a subtle sweetness that needs no seasoning, no preparation beyond a quick rinse in the stream that runs past the garden. Later, she will harvest the leaves. Rich green, almost emerald in the morning light. High in protein, higher than spinach. Eaten raw in what we would now call a salad, but what her people simply call food. The flowers will go into the evening stew, pale blue fading to violet at the edges. They add color and a mild sweetness that balances the earthier flavors of root vegetables simmering in clay pots over wood fires. When the pods mature and the seeds inside swell, she will dry them on woven mats in the afternoon sun. These dried seeds are the real treasure, packed with protein that rivals any meat her village could hunt, substantial fat content for sustained energy, complete nutrition that stores for months without refrigeration, without preservation, without anything modern technology claims to provide. And when the growing season ends, when the vine yellows and dies back, she will dig beneath the base of the plant and find tubers, starchy, satisfying, dense with nutrients. Protein levels 7 to 10 times higher than the potatoes sitting in your kitchen right now. 5 foods, 1 plant, 0 inputs, 0 dependency, 0 corporations. This is how humans ate for millennia. Not one crop for one purpose. Integrated systems where every part contributed, where waste did not exist, where the concept of buying food would have seemed as strange as buying air. Travel west across the Coral Sea to Indonesia. The island of Java rises from tropical waters, its volcanic soil among the most fertile on Earth. Different climate than the Papua highlands, different language, different customs, but the same plant, the same understanding. Javanese farmers grew the winged bean in polyculture systems that would baffle modern agricultural scientists trained to think in monocultures. The vines climbed over corn stalks, maximizing vertical space in gardens no larger than a suburban backyard. They wrapped around bamboo trellises built by grandfathers and maintained by grandchildren. But here is what made the winged bean invaluable beyond its food production. It fixed nitrogen in the soil. Through symbiotic bacteria living in specialized nodules on its roots, the winged bean pulled nitrogen from the atmosphere and converted it into forms other plants could use. It was not just feeding the family, it was feeding the soil. It was preparing the ground for whatever would be planted next season. The tubers were particularly prized in Java. Roasted over coconut shell charcoal, they develop a flavor profile unlike anything in Western cuisine. Nutty, caramelous, almost smoky from the cooking method. The texture is denser than potato, closer to chestnut, with a creaminess that comes from the higher protein and fat content. Elders in Javanese villages still remember the smell drifting through kampungs on cool evenings. Sweet smoke and earth, and something indefinably nourishing. The scent of food that required nothing but time and fire. Move further west to Burma, to Thailand, to the scattered islands of the Philippines, where Spanish colonizers found local populations healthier than European peasants, despite having none of the agricultural technology the colonizers considered essential. Everywhere across Southeast Asia, the winged bean thrived. Not as a novelty crop experimented with by curious farmers, not as a backup food eaten only when preferred crops failed, as a staple, a foundation, a cornerstone of food systems that sustained populations for longer than Western civilization has existed. The Burmese called it paisan and incorporated it into curries that simmered for hours. The Thai called it tuapu and ate the young pods raw with nam prik, the chili paste that accompanies nearly every meal. The Filipinos called it sigarilyas and grew it in backyard gardens that fed extended families across generations. Different names, different preparations, different cultural contexts, but the same fundamental understanding that modern agricultural science spent 50 years ignoring. This was not primitive agriculture. This was sophisticated food science developed through thousands of years of observation, selection, and accumulated wisdom. Wisdom we are only now beginning to measure with instruments invented in the last century. Modern science would later confirm what these cultures knew intuitively. In 2019, researchers at Cornell University published a comprehensive nutritional analysis of winged bean seeds in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry. They used mass spectrometry, gas chromatography, every tool modern food science possesses. The numbers seemed impossible. 35 to 40% protein by dry weight. Let that number land. This is not a marginal improvement over other legumes. This is competitive with the global king of plant protein. Soy, the crop that dominates industrial agriculture. The crop that has reshaped ecosystems across South America. The crop that receives billions in research funding and government subsidies. Soy hovers around 34% protein. The winged bean matches it. In some traditional varieties selected by indigenous farmers over centuries, it exceeds it. But the protein story goes deeper than simple percentages. Unlike many plant proteins that lack certain essential amino acids, forcing vegetarians to carefully combine foods to achieve complete nutrition, the winged bean delivers all 9 essential amino acids your body cannot manufacture on its own. The amino acid profile is comparable to animal protein, to eggs, to the meat that industrial agriculture insists is necessary for human health. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Food Science and Technology analyzed the fatty acid composition of winged bean seeds. The results challenged everything the low-fat movement spent decades teaching. The seeds contain 12 to 18% oil by weight, substantial, calorie-dense, and composed primarily of linoleic acid and oleic acid, the same heart-healthy fats celebrated in olive oil, the same fats that Mediterranean diet researchers credit with reduced cardiovascular disease. This single plant provides complete protein and healthy fats, without animals, without processing, without anything except soil, water, and time. A separate analysis examined the leaves, protein content comparable to spinach per gram, calcium levels exceeding milk by weight, iron, vitamin A, vitamin C, folate, a single species producing what would require an entire produce section to replicate. But here is where the data becomes deeply uncomfortable for the industrial agriculture model. Researchers at the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture in Nigeria spent 3 years documenting the nitrogen fixation capacity of the winged bean across multiple soil types and climate conditions. The findings threatened a $200 billion industry. The winged bean, like all legumes, hosts rhizobium bacteria in specialized root nodules. These microscopic partners perform a kind of biological alchemy that no factory can replicate at comparable efficiency. They pull nitrogen gas from the atmosphere, the same nitrogen that makes up 78% of every breath you take, and they convert it into ammonia and nitrates, forms that plants can absorb through their roots, forms that fertilizer companies spend enormous energy and resources manufacturing in industrial facilities. When the winged bean dies back at the end of its growing season, or when roots naturally shed during growth, that fixed nitrogen remains in the soil. The next crop planted in that location has access to fertility you did not purchase. Fertility that appeared from thin air, literally. The numbers documented by the research team were staggering. A healthy stand of winged beans can fix between 100 and 200 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. That translates to roughly 200 to 400 pounds of pure fertilizer manufactured for free by the plant, while simultaneously producing 5 edible foods. A 2023 analysis published in Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems calculated what this means economically. At current synthetic nitrogen fertilizer prices, which have spiked dramatically since 2021, that free biological fixation is worth between $300 and $600 per hectare annually, every single year, indefinitely, without purchasing anything from anyone. For a small farmer in Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, this represents the difference between dependency and sovereignty, between paying for inputs and keeping that money for education, healthcare, or simply food security during difficult seasons. This is not marginal efficiency. This is not a minor improvement to existing systems. This is a direct existential challenge to a global synthetic fertilizer industry worth over $200 billion annually. So if the winged bean is so valuable, so nutritious, so capable of transforming small-scale agriculture across the developing world, why is it not everywhere? Why have you never seen it in a supermarket? Why is it not taught in agricultural extension programs? Why does it not appear in the dietary guidelines issued by governments that claim to care about nutrition? What happened? The answer begins in the same year that should have launched a global agricultural revolution, 1975. The National Academy of Sciences convenes a panel of experts to assess underexploited tropical plants with promising economic value. They review dozens of candidates. They analyze nutritional data. They consider cultivation requirements and adaptation potential. The winged bean makes the final list, and the language they use to describe it is extraordinary for a scientific body known for cautious, measured, hedged statements. They call it remarkable. They call it exceptional. They describe it as a one-species supermarket. They note that nearly every part of the plant is edible and nutritious. They identify it explicitly as a potential solution for protein malnutrition in regions where animal protein remains scarce or unaffordable. The report is published. It circulates through development agencies. Research stations in the Philippines begin controlled trials. Papua New Guinea expands existing cultivation programs. Agricultural ministries across Africa express interest. International development organizations write funding proposals. For a brief window, perhaps 18 months, it seems like the winged bean might actually receive the sustained attention its potential deserves. Then the momentum stopped. Not dramatically, not through any visible decision or announcement. The interest simply evaporated. Funding requests submitted in 1976 were denied in 1977. Research programs that had shown promising early results were quietly defunded. Agricultural extension services that were supposed to bring winged bean cultivation to smallholder farmers across 3 continents never materialized at any meaningful scale. By 1985, the winged bean had returned to the obscurity from which the National Academy report had briefly rescued it. The supermarket on a single stalk became a footnote in agricultural history. a curiosity mentioned occasionally in academic papers. A what if that never became what is. The real reason is economic, and it has nothing to do with the capabilities of the plant. In 1975, the same year that landmark report was published, the agrochemical industry was investing billions of dollars in a very different kind of agricultural research. Not research on plants that required nothing from corporations. Research on plants that required everything. Herbicide-resistant crop varieties. Seeds engineered to survive chemical applications that killed every other living plant in the field. Genetic modifications protected by intellectual property law. Varieties designed so that saving seeds from one harvest to plant the next would violate patents. The research paid off spectacularly. For shareholders. Within 2 decades, Roundup-ready soybeans would dominate global agriculture. Farmers who adopted them entered a system with no exit. Seeds had to be purchased new every season because the license agreements prohibited saving. Herbicides had to be purchased from the same company because the resistance trait only worked with their proprietary formulation. A closed loop of dependency. Disguised as innovation. Marketed as efficiency. Enforced through legal agreements that most farmers never fully read before signing. The winged bean represented the opposite model. No annual seed purchase necessary. The plant produces viable seeds that can be saved indefinitely. No chemical inputs required. It fixes its own nitrogen and competes reasonably well with weeds once established. No corporate dependency created of any kind. Plant it once, and you are free. One path led to recurring revenue. Customers who must return every season with money in hand. Profits that compound annually. Share prices that climb predictably. The other path led to food sovereignty. Farmers who need nothing from multinational corporations. Communities that feed themselves without external inputs. Self-sufficiency that generates zero revenue for anyone except the people doing the work. Which path do you think attracted investment capital? The global synthetic nitrogen fertilizer market now exceeds $200 billion annually. The herbicide market adds another $40 billion. Proprietary seeds and associated licensing fees contribute another $50 billion. That is nearly $300 billion flowing every year through a system built on one foundational assumption. The assumption that farmers cannot feed themselves without purchasing inputs. The winged bean disproves that assumption completely. You cannot patent a plant that has been cultivated for 7,000 years. You cannot create recurring revenue from a crop that improves soil fertility instead of depleting it. You cannot build a fertilizer empire when the plant manufactures its own nitrogen more efficiently than your factories. And so the winged bean was buried. Not through conspiracy, not through secret meetings in corporate boardrooms, not through any explicit decision that could be documented or challenged. Through something far more effective. Structural invisibility. No one banned the winged bean. No one passed laws making it illegal to grow or sell. No government declared it a controlled substance. The mechanism was simpler and more insidious. They simply stopped talking about it. No seed company promoted it because promoting it generated no repeat customers. No agricultural extension service prioritized it because extension services receive funding from companies selling inputs. No university research program sustained attention on it because research grants flow toward patentable innovations with commercial licensing potential. The plant that could have fed hundreds of millions was simply never mentioned in the channels through which agricultural knowledge flows. And what is never mentioned eventually becomes forgotten. A 2018 analysis published in Global Food Security reviewed 50 years of international agricultural development policy. The researchers traced funding flows. They documented research priorities. They mapped the attention economy of global food systems. The findings confirmed what critics had suspected for decades. Between 1970 and 2018, over 90% of international agricultural development funding went to crops that required purchased inputs. High-yield varieties that demanded fertilizer to achieve their potential. hybrid seeds that did not breed true, forcing annual repurchase. Less than 3% went to nitrogen-fixing legumes of any kind. Less than 1% went to underutilized species with documented nutritional advantages. The winged bean was mentioned by name in exactly 0 major agricultural development initiatives after 1985. Not rejected, not evaluated and found wanting, simply absent from the conversation entirely. But the knowledge was never actually lost. In the highland villages of Papua New Guinea, grandmothers still teach granddaughters the old methods. The same varieties that fed their ancestors 7,000 years ago still climb the same garden trellises, still produce the same 5 foods, still improve the same soil for the same crops that follow. The continuity is unbroken because it never depended on institutions that could be defunded or corporations that could shift priorities. Across scattered communities in Southeast Asia, the winged bean survives in backyard gardens and small family plots, not as a commercial crop generating export revenue, not as a development project with monitoring and evaluation frameworks, simply as food. In Burma, traditional farmers still call it paisan and grow it exactly as their great-grandparents did. In Thailand, Tua Pu still climbs bamboo trellises in rural villages that tourist buses never reach. In Indonesia, kecipir still feeds families who never stopped growing it, regardless of what international development agencies recommended. The knowledge persisted because it was held by people, not institutions. And now something remarkable is beginning to happen. Over the past decade, a quiet revival has emerged. Not driven by governments that ignored the plant for 50 years, not funded by corporations that profit from its absence. Driven by individuals who discovered what had been hidden and refused to let it stay hidden. Small seed companies specializing in rare and heritage varieties now stock winged bean seeds. They ship to addresses across 6 continents. Online forums connect growers in Florida with growers in the Philippines, exchanging cultivation tips and seed varieties. Food sovereignty movements have identified the winged bean as a priority species for exactly the reasons the industrial model marginalized it. Because it creates independence, because it requires nothing, because it threatens no one except those who profit from dependency. In 2022, a farmer cooperative in Mindanao began the first commercial-scale winged bean production the Philippines had seen in decades. Within 6 months, their waiting list for seeds exceeded available supply. Urban gardeners in subtropical regions of the United States discovered that the winged bean thrives in conditions they already have. Videos documenting successful harvests have accumulated millions of views. The algorithm, for once, appears to be spreading genuinely useful knowledge. Formal research has resumed as well, funded this time by organizations operating outside the industrial agriculture funding ecosystem. The World Vegetable Center in Taiwan has assembled one of the most comprehensive collections of winged bean genetic diversity on Earth. Traditional varieties are being documented. Superior performers are being identified and made available. A 2023 study from the University of the Philippines evaluated 23 traditional varieties for yield potential, protein content, and disease resistance under controlled conditions. The highest performing varieties produced over 3,000 kilograms of dried seed per hectare. That yield exceeds industrial soybean production in many regions, with 0 purchased fertilizer, with minimal pest management, with seeds that farmers can save and replant indefinitely. The information exists now for anyone willing to search for it. Reclaiming this knowledge requires only a decision to act. Step 1. Source the seeds. Specialty seed companies now carry multiple winged bean varieties. Search online for Sophocarpus tetragonalobus, or simply winged bean seeds. Some suppliers offer varieties selected for shorter growing seasons, suitable for temperate climates with careful timing. In tropical and subtropical regions, nearly any variety will perform well. Step 2. Provide climbing support. The winged bean is a vigorous vine that can reach 3 to 4 meters in a single growing season. It must have something to climb: a sturdy trellis, an existing fence, neighboring corn stalks planted specifically as living supports, bamboo poles lashed into a frame, Without vertical support, the vine sprawls along the ground and produces poorly. Step 3. Plant after all frost danger has passed. The winged bean requires consistent warmth, ideally above 20 degrees Celsius. In temperate climates, this typically means late spring planting with protection during establishment. In tropical climates, planting can occur year-round with timing adjusted for wet and dry seasons. Step 4. Water moderately and wait patiently. The plant establishes slowly during its first month, then accelerates dramatically once it begins climbing. Flowering typically begins 2 to 3 months after planting. The flowers are self-pollinating, requiring no intervention. Once pod formation begins, it continues for months. Step 5. Harvest progressively throughout the season. Young pods can be picked when they reach 15 to 20 centimeters, and the seeds inside remain small. These are prepared like green beans. As the season progresses, allow some pods to mature and dry on the vine. These dried seeds become your protein storage and your seed stock for future seasons. Step 6. Dig the tubers carefully at season end. After the vine yellows and dies back naturally, dig around the base of each plant. The tubers are more fragile than potatoes and damage easily. Handle them gently. Store in cool, dry conditions or prepare immediately. Step 7. Save seeds religiously. Select your healthiest, most productive plants. Allow their pods to dry completely on the vine until they turn brown and papery. Harvest, shell. Store the dried seeds in a cool, dark location in airtight containers. These seeds remain viable for years. You will never need to purchase seeds again. That is the complete process. One initial investment of time and attention, returns that continue indefinitely. 5 foods from one plant. Soil improved for whatever follows. The story of the winged bean is not really about one plant. It is about how economic systems built on dependency handle solutions that require no purchase. How knowledge that creates independence gets filtered out of channels we trust. How the most valuable things are often precisely the things no one can sell to us. For 7,000 years, communities across Southeast Asia and the Pacific understood something the industrial model cannot accommodate. Food security does not come from dependency on distant suppliers. It comes from plants that ask for nothing and give everything. From knowledge passed between generations without transactions. From soil that improves rather than depletes. We traded that understanding for convenience, for seed catalogs, for fertilizer bags with optimistic promises, for the comfortable illusion that someone else would handle our nourishment if we just kept purchasing. But forgetting is not the same as losing. The winged bean still grows in highland villages and backyard gardens across its native range. It still fixes nitrogen from empty air. It still produces 5 foods from one organism. It still waits for anyone willing to plant it. This knowledge was never erased. It was only buried beneath the weight of a $300 billion annual assumption. The assumption that you cannot feed yourself without buying something. That assumption is wrong. It has always been wrong. And now you know it is wrong. The choice is yours. If this archive opens something for you, subscribe and hit the bell. Every like and share helps preserve this knowledge from disappearing again. The next archive opens soon.